chat box there as well. My name is Beth Miller. I'm the Government Affairs Manager with Jewish Voice for Peace, and I'm going to be speaking very little during this call because we are just thrilled to have the panelists that we have with us today from Adalah and from the Adalah Justice Project. But we just wanted to say that we are so thrilled as JVP to be able to host this webinar today, and also to make sure that you all who are joining us right now and who will be joining us when you watch this recording later on are going to be able to hear from these wonderful panelists. I know that today is a busy day, whether you're in Palestine or in the US. Politics is going a little wild right now, so we're really grateful for everyone who's taking the time to sit with us and talk today. And from there, I'll just reiterate that if there are any tech issues that come up, please do just write into the chat box and be a little patient, but I will make sure that we can figure out whatever tech issues you're having, and then throw any questions that you have in there throughout, and we will be addressing them later on. And with that, I'm gonna just get us started and pass it off to Sandra with the Adalah Justice Project to do introductions to our panelists and the issue and the organizations. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Beth. Adalah and Adalah Justice Project are just thrilled to be partnering with Jewish Voice for Peace. We're so grateful for so many people for signing on, for the interest. And we've kept our partners in Haifa up late, and they're missing a lot of activity that's going on around Palestine. Just want to, shout out quickly to the Palestinian women who are marching throughout Palestine and in the diaspora today, as we speak, demanding an end to colonial violence and patriarchal violence in our societies. And it's really exciting to be seeing the news of those demonstrations coming in now. So I want to get right to it so that, folks that are in Haifa can get to those marches that are happening outside their doors. We are really excited. I'm Sandra Tamari. I'm with the Adalah Justice Project. Adalah Justice Project is a Palestinian advocacy organization based in the U.S. We base our analysis and our framework on a focus on Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinians of 48, as a way of helping people understand the root causes and the structural oppression that Israel is inflicting on Palestinians. It helps us get out of an occupation framework. It helps people go back to the source of issues which stem from the Nakba and stem from this one legal regime inside of all historic Palestine that aims to seize as much land as possible with as few Palestinians as possible. Adalah is our partner organization. The Adalah Justice Project is an independent organization, but we are closely aligned with our partner, Adalah, the Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel, an organization that's been around doing amazing strategic litigation and advocacy since 1996. Working within the Israeli courts to represent Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinians under occupation and those in the diaspora in certain cases. We're really thrilled to have two of our really great analysts and media coordinators from Adalah join us today. We're going to be hearing from Remez, who's our Hebrew language coordinator, and Amjad Iraqi, one of our international advocacy coordinators. They will be, keep getting us up to speed on all of the things that are happening as a result of the Israeli elections that happened last week. But they're going to cover some of the things that maybe aren't covered, are not being covered as much in the U.S. press, including voter intimidation and incitement against Palestinian citizens of Israel. An analysis about how Israel has become a right-wing country, regardless of who ends up in the leadership position, and really exploring this analysis of the one legal regime that's operating in all of historic Palestine, with a specific emphasis on annexation and the nation-state law. So with that, I really am excited to welcome you both, Ari and Amjad, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Beth. Thanks so much, Sandra. Hello, everyone from Haifa. And that gives a heads up in case you need any adjustments. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of start kicking off on the three kind of main analysis points that Sandra mentioned. We're not going to go too much into the technical details of all these things, but we want to kind of give everyone here a couple of takeaways, essentially, of some of the main observations that we have, both as Adalah and both as kind of political nerds ourselves, of what happened and what transpired the past couple of weeks, especially. So the first kind of cluster of analysis, the first cluster of analysis that we can talk into actually is regarding the attacks on Palestinian citizens of Israel specifically. Again, this is a 20% community that exists inside the Israeli state borders that have Israeli citizenship that remained on the Israeli side of the border after the 1948 Nakba, and they have Israeli citizenship to this day. Now, Palestinian citizens have voting rights. They are even are allowed to vote for Arab political representatives in the Knesset. And this fact has never, tends to be kind of described as this signal of democratic rights and democratic practice for Jews as well as non-Jews. But some of the examples we're going to bring up will show that just because you have the right to vote does not actually mean you're able to enjoy that right in a healthy democratic practice. And in this past election in particular, we saw some pretty unprecedented levels of attack. Now, Palestinian citizens they're not new to Benjamin Netanyahu's history of racist incitement. In 2015, one of the most kind of quoted lines that he gave was about Arab citizens kind of going to the polls in droves and threatening the dominance of the right wing. That's now very minuscule compared to the things that he was saying over these past few weeks. Just for an example, Netanyahu constantly used this phrase about a leftist Arab government, the idea of a coalition between Benny Gantz, who's anything but a leftist, who is in fact a center-right politician, as Ari will probably go into as well, to kind of keep up this idea that there is this conspiracy that's trying to remove the right wing from power, and that Arab political participation is inherently a threat, as is any idea of kind of leftist politics in the eyes of Netanyahu. Throughout the entire period, Netanyahu was also constantly making these baseless claims, of voter fraud in Arab polling stations. And he'll also talk a little bit about some of the methods that he's trying to do to kind of continue that myth. But this, again, facilitated this idea, as is often heard, like even in the United States, of the idea of voter fraud by minority communities. And another thing also, which was actually that his Facebook page, I think there was like a chatbot kind of message that sent to his followers that the Arabs want to annihilate us. So again, just some of these kind of unprecedented examples, especially in the closing weeks of the campaign, where he's constantly demonizing Palestinian citizens rhetorically. The second level of these attacks actually has come through disqualifications. These disqualification motions put against political representatives or political slates, and these motions tend to be targeted specifically against Palestinian representatives in the Knesset. Now, in the April election, some of these disqualification motions kind of went forward, and we were able to dismiss them. And we did not see the same attempted motions in this round because there was generally an understanding that it was sorted in April, and so there was not much use to go into it this time around, except for the Jewish Power Party, Otzma Yehudit, which is regarded like the Kahanist party, who still tried to file the motion, and in the end, the Supreme Court basically dismissed their appeal to try to get the joint list, the main alliance of Arab political parties, disqualified.
But this was done with support of the Likud.
Yes.
Without their signatures, they couldn't have done that appeal to the Supreme Court.
Exactly, yeah. So even though legally we tend to win these cases and we're usually able to dismiss them, the fact, again, is that even at the Knesset level, these attempts to shove out Palestinian citizens from the political sphere are still very much present, even when the legal precedent states clearly that it's okay for them to run. And then the third kind of example of attacks is what I was mentioning about these claims of voter fraud and how that channeled into a policy of trying to plant surveillance cameras in polling stations in Arab communities. So back in April, they discovered actually that there are about 1,300 cameras or so actually used by Likud kind of electoral participants at polling stations, they often like strapped to their T-shirts and things like that, and they were discovered. And these would often, on one hand, they would be when they were discovered that they would kind of cause, trouble at the polls, and then things got postponed, and then people couldn't vote, etc. Then also the very idea that Palestinian citizens were being watched and being surveyed by these cameras was clearly an attempt by the Likud party specifically to try to intimidate people from going to the polls. After that was revealed back in April, Adalah, for example, we tried to initiate some actions to ensure that that wouldn't happen again. In this election round, the Central Elections Committee here forbade the use of those cameras, but even that didn't stop the Likud party. Benjamin Netanyahu actually went to the Knesset to try to pass legislation that would then allow cameras to be placed in these areas. And thankfully, that was also, that move was actually failed to pass through the Knesset floor. But it's again, all of these things combined, of the incitement, of the disqualification, and of the cameras, is really seeing this kind of unprecedented, full-out and open political assault on Palestinian citizens at a scale that we really are seeing rising from April, that we're seeing rising from 2015, that we're seeing rising from 2013. And this is just, Netanyahu is just one focal point for all this. But again, just to emphasize, as kind of Ari will maybe go into a bit more, this is very much sort of accepted or normalized in much of the Israeli political spectrum.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I would like to just highlight the fact that most of the analysis seen on the media describing these elections during the process of the election, both elections and after the results, are misleading. The reason is that generally the system has always been generally described as a two-block system of right and left. And this comes also in graphical terms in the papers. You see like pie charts with red and blue colors, and with different colors for whoever's in the middle and might do a coalition with each side. This, in Israeli political culture, this is like usually something that there's like a deadlock between left and right in Israel. This is how this is conceptualized in the political culture and discourse and in the media, but this does not describe whatsoever the reality. Because the reason that there is a rise in what is called the center politics, which is actually right-wing parties that are using the same, that support the same policies as the Likud and the rest of the right-wing parties, but have different views regarding certain personas. So these elections were on the question whether the Israeli public support Netanyahu continuing his governance or not, and not whether his policies should be overruled. And this is really, really essential because the liberal Zionists on so-called left have been supporting eagerly this alternative, which is only alternative in persons but not in policies. This is very important to understand because the new party that replaced what used to be the Labour Party as the alternative bloc party to the Likud is a party that has three generals in top places, and Yair Lapid, who holds his own racist views. And their campaign started with Benny Gantz. His campaign was vote for me because I killed more than 1,400 Palestinians in Gaza during the 2014 war. And he actually had a body count on his TV ads. He also, in order to make a larger party, he took all kinds of political groups that left Netanyahu's party or used to support Netanyahu, weren't in parliament till that moment, And now, basically, this has totally, if we now translate the amount of seats in parliament to supporting certain bills, you would see that the situation has shifted way to the right, including, we'll talk about this later on, the nation-state law, which has been a bit in the beginning of the first round of these elections, especially Druze citizens who serve in the military, who approached Benny Gantz and asked him to say that he would support reversing that law. Eventually, he said this law should be corrected, should be fixed by some, like adding more articles, but he wasn't talking about canceling the law whatsoever. And he is the least extreme right in his own party. So the shift is huge. And the party that is between both so-called blocs is Lieberman, the party that basically calls for taking away citizenship from Palestinian citizens. So we're talking about like 3 blocks of right, liberal Zionists that have failed totally to keep a party with their own views and joined in with Ehud Barak, who's responsible for all that happened in October 2000, and with Stav Shapir, who left the Labor Party. And just last night, she said on Israeli radio that she supported disqualifying Balad from the elections, but unfortunately, she couldn't have done so because of legal reasons. So basically, the whole system has shifted totally right, and it's still described because I think this is because of the nature of the media that is using the same tools to represent the political drama between right and left, but it doesn't describe reality at all. I would also like to add that the disqualifications that Amjad was speaking about earlier, one of the interesting things that happened with the disqualifications is that in the second round, no one really believed that they would succeed in disqualifying the Palestinian candidates, but there wasn't, they insisted on doing so because there were two candidates from the Kahana party that were disqualified, and they wanted to make a false, like a false equation between both sides, and showing that if you support disqualifying racist members of parliament from Otzma Yehudit, then of course you should support disqualifying so-called supporters of terrorism. And the reason I think the Likud joined into that motion was twofold. One is to, of course, it was a political, they could gain more votes from, or not lose votes from Kahana, blaming them for not joining into that motion. The other was knowing that this would bring to a rhetorical point where they could attack the Supreme Court, saying, well, this is the leftist Supreme Court that we're trying to stop with legislation, because they're allowing supporters of terror into the parliament, but not allowing good Jews that are trying to stop mixed marriages, for instance. So I just wanted to fill that up.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And now going on to the kind of third cluster that we want to raise to everyone here is actually not pulling out to the macro level. That when we've given these political analyses and some of the dynamics that have happened, but what we want to emphasize as well is that regardless of which political party ultimately wins, regardless of how the coalition is finally formed and all these political details, even the possibility of going into a third election, what needs to be grasped by everyone is that this, whatever new government comes in, they are now entering into what is essentially a fully enshrined single legal regime that stretches from the river to the sea. What most people call a one-state reality, but what we'd also emphasize is to understand as the one legal regime. And as Sandra mentioned, there are two particular elements that that are kind of pillars of this system. One is a Jewish nation-state law, and the other are kind of are annexation laws, most of which are being pushed forward, but that we should read with a certain different understanding. So the nation-state law, and we've talked about this in kind of previous events, is that, and this law was passed just last year, now that the nation-state law changes nothing and everything at the same time. That the entire legal infrastructure that kind of created Jewish supremacy within the state of Israel, in between, between its Jewish and Palestinian citizens, first and foremost, as well as Palestinian refugees, and then essentially, continued on through the occupation, all this has already existed. Not just, again, through the military system that keeps Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, under military rule, but that even Palestinian citizens inside face Israeli civil laws that make them second-class citizens. These are laws that allow kind of segregation in housing, or that grant power to the state to essentially do whatever it wants with state land, which is essentially gives to Jewish citizens and not to Palestinian citizens. There are laws that restrict Palestinian citizens' right to marry and have children and bring them into Israel if they're Palestinians from the West Bank or the Gaza Strip or from so-called like enemy states. And this is a blanket ban that's applied, very similar to the idea behind the Muslim ban in the United States. Adalah, we have a discriminatory laws database, you can find on our website, which collects about 60 or 65 laws, which essentially enshrine that second-class status. Now, a lot of these laws, when you look at them, they don't appear kind of racist or discriminatory at face value. Some do, and most don't, but the important point is that these laws are actually used precisely in that kind of neutral terminology in order to ensure the second-class status of Palestinians. So like I said, in that respect, there's nothing new about the Jewish nation-state law. At the same time, it does change everything in the sense that this is a constitutional law. And it's not just about making a declaration that your state is supposed to be premised on Jewish supremacy, on Hebrew being the primary language and Arabic just its special status. That as Article 7 of the law says, that Jewish settlement is a national value and not just a choice to be made. The constitutional status of this legislation is to give the idea that you are almost obligated to ensure Jewish supremacy, that you're compelled to. And this nation-state law is currently being under review on the Supreme Court. Adalah, together with the Palestinian representatives in Israel, the Joint List and the High Follow-up Committee, are one of 14 petitioners against the law. The hearings have been delayed because of the repeated elections, essentially delaying a lot of the processes. We are predicting that a hearing will be held next year, and we will see how the legal developments unfold. But it's again important to realize that the nation-state law is, as we were talking about this earlier, like it's almost irreversible, and the spirit of the law, regardless of how the law exists in reality or how it's put in practice, the very spirit and essence of that legislation is very much manifested in, for example, how in the city of Afuli you have a public park where they were trying to basically forbid Palestinian citizens from using that public park, where it's city council members who are promising to preserve the Jewish character of the city. It's in Benjamin Netanyahu writing on his Instagram a few months ago that according to the nation-state law, Israel is a state for Jews and Jews alone. It's manifested in the political debates that have been going on. As Ari was mentioning, that there's not a criticism of the existence of a nation-state law. It's just about how you word it, or do you just amend it with a few adjustments here and there. So this is absolutely important to recognize. And again, this isn't just about inside the Israel state borders, but it's essentially recognizing the idea of the land of Israel, and that Jewish sovereignty basically exists throughout the land of Israel, which includes everything between the river and the sea. And this should then be tied to the attempts to kind of legally annex Israel's settlements and surrounding areas into the state officially. But I would want to emphasize here that we know from a lot of people, we see a lot of people basically assuming that as long as a law doesn't formally annex it, that it's not yet annexed. This is a mistake. What people refer to as de facto annexation has to be understood as official annexation. For most people, living here, there is only one regime between the river and the sea. And even in the political discourse, even in just recent weeks, the debate around the Jordan Valley, where you had Netanyahu making his dramatic announcement that he would annex the Jordan Valley, and then Benny Gantz saying that was our idea. So this is very much ingrained now into the Israeli political mindset, into Israeli strategic thinking. So again, one of the takeaway from this is to not wait for more proof that we live in one legal regime, that we live in one state reality. And if you needed the final proof, it's the passing of the Jewish nation state law, and it's the political discourse and basic reality that exists on the ground, enshrining that one legal system.
I don't think I have anything to add.
Nice.
We can just go to questions, I guess.
Thank you so much. That was a really rich presentation. We've got some questions coming in. So I might kick us off with one, and then people can keep sharing their questions into the chat box here as well. I have tons of questions from what you all just presented, but I'll start with one, which is that over the weekend, Ayman Odeh published an op-ed in the New York Times stating that the Arab Joint List would be recommending Benny Gantz as Israel's next prime minister in order to end Netanyahu's rule. You talked a little bit about how this was really just about people and personalities more than policies. I'm curious if you can explain why 3 out of the 4 parties of the Joint List decided to recommend Gantz. And then similarly, another question that came in, I think that's connected, is just, now, obviously, the president has recommended Netanyahu to form the government. So what does that mean in light of all this, and what do you see happening next? Thanks.
Wow. It's a very complex question. The reason is that, first of all, I think that the reality that the members of Knesset from the Joint List are facing is something that is very difficult to understand from outside. There were polls that suggested that over 60% of the Palestinian citizens in Israel supported recommending Gantz as prime minister. And I think that this should be understood in a certain context. The political reality, as most Israelis see it, is that not recommending on any candidate is basically recommending Netanyahu. And the many Palestinian citizens thought that, first of all, you have to understand that the turnout was very high in these elections among Palestinians. And some of it is probably can be acclaimed to Netanyahu's incitement and attacks. I think the most iconic image of these elections were of Ayman Odeh holding during a session in the parliament regarding legislation of the cameras in ballots. And Netanyahu got off the podium, and Ayman Odeh stood like this with a camera in front of his face. And that was a very powerful and iconic picture, and which I think did help out taking the vote out. So basically, there is a sentiment where voting was done in order to revenge Netanyahu's incitement against the Palestinians. Therefore, the members of parliament felt compelled to do whatever there was in their power to do so. So that is the general context of that decision. There was also a very interesting thing that Ayman Odeh did during his session with the president, which is broadcasted live on televisions at home. He said that it is their feeling that the Israeli public has voted against Netanyahu's rule, and he feels that the Palestinians should do their share in taking him down. And they do not support Benny Gantz, but they want to see Netanyahu end his term. So that is the general context. Since things have become very, very complicated. First of all, when they appeared at the president, they said they represent all 13 members of the Joint List. Later on, the day after, they sent a letter saying that the members of Balad have withdrawn their 3 votes, and the narratives around the circumstances of that withdrawal have been discussed widely now in the press. And just last night, Ayman Odeh said that this was upon the request of Benny Gantz because he wanted to make sure that Netanyahu would get his chance first, so he would fail in forming a government. So this has been going, and I think that for most liberal Zionists in Israel, this was a very important step because they are trying to preserve this false interpretation of a two-block system, trying to dream of the days of Rabin, where a support coming from outside the government by Palestinian members of parliament, which has, this would be like, this is not the first time that that a candidate is recommended or supported from outside of the government by Palestinian members of parliament. This is the first time within a context where the candidate is trying to shrug off, like to make sure that there's no association with him and with Palestinian men. So that is the crazy thing about it.
Yeah. And the thing I would just maybe add very quickly is that, you know, as all these kind of events are sort of unfolding, that what's going on with the joint list now is it's still a huge debate, and it really is polarizing Palestinian opinion. It's polarizing it inside, it's a big debate among Palestinians inside Israel, in the occupied territories, and in the diaspora. What I would emphasize is that, you know, these discussions, you know, that there's, especially for Palestinians inside Israel, the debate is a very gray area. And this, like Ari said, that, you know, Palestinian citizens, you know, for them, for some, or many, there's in fact a huge strategic benefit to trying to remove Netanyahu. Remember that this is a community that's been bearing the brunt of increasingly right-wing racist laws, racist rhetoric, discriminatory policies that you're seeing getting worse and worse on the ground. And so for them, you know, trying to get rid of Netanyahu and the kind of right-wing, you know, the far right-wing bloc that he has is something that might be worth doing. The flip side of that is they're realizing that in order to do so, the best shot that they have, given the political landscape, is to back this military, this former army chief, you know, who boasted about bombing Gaza back to the Stone Age, who said that he would only sit with parties that were Jewish and Zionist in his coalition, and has basically kind of echoed the same politics and rhetoric as the very rival that he's trying to depose. And so, you know, in the kind of nuance, you know, trying to add some nuance to the debate, and regardless of what your opinion is, it's an understanding that the idea of backing guns for those who supported that move does not mean that they actually in support of guns. That for them, it's actually a gamble to try to create a crack in what's been seen as this kind of invincible success of the far right wing of the past decade. But again, you know, Palestine. But with that said, again, a lot of Palestinians say, but this, you know, this has very to be having severe ramifications for the Palestinian question itself. What does it mean to replace Netanyahu just with someone else who has similar policies? So it's a very kind of it's a very back and forth debate with consequences that time will only tell. But again, it's just to kind of add the kind of general scene of where that debate is today.
I think you could also add like two more complexities to that. Mm-hmm. One is that there is a realpolitik of slowing down the process that the extreme religious right has been leading for the past few years in legislation. We're talking about on the ground annexation, and we're talking about also shrinking physical spaces of the Palestinians within 48. And this is done by very brilliant work of legislation and bill passing in the parliament. So replacing that government by recommending guns, which is basically more a technical step than an ideological one, could have its benefits on slowing down the process of legislation. So I think on the moral side, that should be considered. I would also add to that that there's another goal that I think Ayman Odeh tried to achieve, and the Joint List as a whole, is to take leadership in what they see as the correct political partnership between Jews and Arabs in Israel. And I think this is something that it's arguable. You could look at it in several ways. Maybe this might be glorifying Israel, so-called Israeli democracy and so on, but there is, I think, a real goal saying that, okay, there is no political power among Jews now that would show a political alternative to the current government policies, so we're going to take the lead on that, and then they're calling more votes. It is a very small change, but I think it is a very big one. You have to understand that the joint list in the 2015 elections, it's an estimate, had around somewhere between 2,000 to 5,000 Jews who voted for them. Now we're talking somewhere between 15,000 to 30,000 votes. So we're talking about like a big step on more and more Israelis that are saying, okay, the political leadership we're looking for is with Palestinians. And I think this has to do with that picture.
Thank you for that. We've got a lot more questions coming in. A few of them are very specific to the questions about the election and coalition building, but I think we might come back to those in a second, because I would love to also kind of take a little bit of a step back, because some of the other questions are a bit broader and I think they can weave together. But one question that came in, and I think you kind of spoke to this a bit when you spoke about some of the de facto things that have just been changing on the ground for decades now, as well as this kind of shrinking space that's being created for Palestinians inside of Israel. But the question was, if you could share your sense a little bit of what has taken place in Israel over the last years, decades, that has led to this kind of just total and complete collapse of any real left, as you are saying is kind of happening now. So just a small question.
2 sentences. You want to go for this? Or should
I can just, like in bullets, I think that the unrealistic expectation from the Oslo process and its collapse in 2000, I think, is the most, for most Israelis, had made this radical change in, or I don't think it's a change, actually. This is my personal view. This is not Adalah or anyone else. Personally, I feel that this has not really changed or shifted Israeli views, but has revealed them. I think that what we see in Gantz's party, if you look deep inside, you see this goes down to the roots of the Labor Party, being a very militant political party. And what has changed is the question that Ehud Barak, I think, is the most responsible for, the concept that there is no partner. And I think the misconception that was in the Israeli, I'm talking, this is something both in discourse and in Israeli perception of the situation between Israelis and Palestinians. Most of the Israelis have a misconception seeing the situation as a conflict between two sides. And this misconception brings on to saying, okay, well, now the other side is not a partner. And I think this has brought the rise since the year 2000 to now to more and more nationalistic views within the mainstream, and has completely collapsed the system of two systems. Like there's the peace supporting side and the nationalistic side. Now everything is like it's pragmatic politics of people who are not ashamed of saying they're nationalists. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and just to actually keep channeling that downwards as well, like with inside Israel, in addition to all these larger dynamics of the Oslo context, we're also seeing this big transformation, like within the Israeli legal system itself, and again, that's influenced by these political dynamics. So, just for example, like in the 1990s, this was a time of huge activity from Palestinian citizens of Israel. NGOs like Adalah were starting to emerge, renewed political thinking, renewed connections with the Palestinian community in the occupied territories and abroad. These were all opening up new initiatives and chances for Palestinian citizens to at least fight for equality. It was like there was an uncertainty what the political agreement will finally be, with the assumption that Oslo would lead towards some kind of agreement, but that regardless of what the politics, whatever politics transpires, that we as Palestinian citizens have our rights secured, and that it's based on equality, that it's based on social justice, whether it's in land, in our civil and political rights, etc. And this is where groups like Adalah came in and really started pushing the legal system to begin recognizing that. It was very difficult, very challenging, and we didn't always win, but there was, we managed to achieve some really important precedent cases that we then continued to use on a collective basis for the whole community. So you were seeing some cautious but optimistic cautious optimistic progress. And after 2000, and especially kind of by what's seen here as like the trauma of the Second Intifada, you do see this major right-wing nationalistic trend, which not only manifested in politics, but manifested legally. So in fact, for example, about half of the discriminatory laws that Adalah has recorded in its database, about half of those were passed since 2009, under the three consecutive governments of Benjamin Netanyahu, with each government being more right-wing than the first. And there are several reasons for this, but one of the principal ones was this fear that Palestinians inside Israel, inside the state, were using the Israeli legal system to essentially achieve their rights. And that for the right wing, it was no longer possible to just maintain our second-class status, and let alone kind of maintain their superiority in the occupied territories, only by kind of practical government policies or attempted maneuvers here and there. That they wanted to enshrine Jewish privilege, and they wanted to enshrine their hold of the occupied territories as Israeli civil law. So this is why you have the admissions committee's law passed in 2011 allowing housing segregation. It's why you have even the anti-boycott law that tries to kind of intimidate people from participating in non-violent actions against Israeli occupation or Israeli government bodies or any kind of criticism of the state. It's why you again have the nation-state law, which is kind of the biggest consolidation of the vision of the right wing. But again, as Ari said, that even still that vision of Jewish privilege and Jewish superiority was always integral to the state from the get-go. But now what's different is that the right wants to turn that into a fact of law and not just a basic fact on the ground. And again, we're seeing this with the annexation laws, whereby it's not enough that the settlements have already made it a one-state reality, and the military presence has made it one-state reality. It's that we want it to be declared, and we want it to be unquestionable for everyone abroad and for everyone inside that this is a Jewish state, first and foremost. And to make it harder for groups like Adalah to try continuing our challenges through the Israeli legal system and even in the political and public discourse.
I think it's also important to talk about the fact that there is a difference. When I spoke earlier about slowing down the process of annexation and so on, the extreme right wing, which has been controlling Netanyahu's government for the past 2 decades, are basically trying to achieve a one state solution with they're not hiding it, that Palestinians that would live within that one state would not have any rights at all. They're talking about straight apartheid as their ideology. The alternative right wing that is led at what is now the Israeli center is now looking for a different solution, where they have what they call a two-state solution, but what basically they're talking about is having more land with less Palestinians. That is the logic behind their maps, and this goes way to what is considered left. Now, for instance, Meretz, who used to be the liberal left party, is now joined together with Barak and his number 2, which is number 3 in the party, released a map that is very, very similar to Netanyahu's map just 2 days before the elections or whatever. They were like a week before he showed the annexation of the Jordan Valley. He showed a map very similar because they were looking at, yes, we want a two-state solution, and this is how it looks like, but it can't be in the 67 line. So basically, the practice is the same, but the reasoning behind it is different. And that is also gives another perspective to the journalist's decision as well.
Thank you. I'm curious to know, there's a few different kind of themes coming out in these questions, including questions like, based on what you just said, was there ever really a genuine Israeli left? It sounds like, there's something has been revealed rather than created maybe, as well as kind of what you see happening in the future, really, for Palestinians moving forward. But I'm curious if we can kind of answer those questions with also a look toward, and maybe Sandra, if you want to hop in at all, how Adalah Justice Project and Adalah work together on kind of bringing in the US base to work on this as well. I also heard a lot of, there's obviously differences in how it happens, but just a ton of similarities in what you just described and what we see happening right now in the US with Trump. And so I'm curious if the three of you could speak a bit to kind of how you work together to shift both what's happening in Israel and in the US to kind of change and stop the harm that's being caused now.
Yeah, Sandra, please go ahead. Actually, you can kick it off.
Yeah, no, thank you, Beth. I appreciate the question. As I mentioned in the introduction, we definitely feel that 48 is the key in many ways to understanding how Israel operates. This system that was perfected, right, under martial law, the way that Israel kept Palestinian citizens under martial law at the beginning, from 1948 to 1966, was a perfection of what they transferred to 67 territories. So the checkpoints, the land confiscation, the criminalization of protest, the arrest, the torture, all of that was applied directly to Palestinian citizens of Israel from the start, and then simply transferred to the occupation regime. And so, people often forget that land confiscation continues on both sides of the so-called Green Line, that we have, villages separated by this imaginary line that are facing the same exact, policies, laws, techniques and tactics of land confiscation in the Nakab and in the South Hebron Hills. And you'll see a lot of people, raise up, the flag to protect Susia, but don't really pay attention to what's happening, in Haran or Iraqi, for instance, because that messes up their idea of what the fight is against. And so we want to disrupt that. And so that's a lot of what Adalah Justice Project is doing. So we'll take this message to different groups, and we try to present our message primarily to two audiences. We really want to increase awareness among Palestinians living in the US about these issues, because the Palestinian community in the US tends to be from the West Bank and doesn't really have relationships or understanding of what's going on inside 48. And the other audience is people that don't generally look at Palestine as part of their progressive politics. So for instance, we'll go in front of housing advocates in a different city, and we'll talk about displacement, we'll talk about admissions committees and how these kinds of committees discriminate on who can come in, who's allowed into, who's socially suitable to live in a community. Socially suitable in Israel means you have to be a Zionist. And so that automatically excludes Palestinians from living in hundreds of communities throughout 48. And when we talk about these issues, suddenly these activists who don't know anything about Palestine, maybe we've shown it to them on the map for the first time, will say, oh, that sounds very similar to the gentrification and the housing covenants that we are fighting against here in our own city. The way that after the devastation of Katrina in New Orleans, housing covenants were written to only allow people to rent to immediate relatives, meaning that white landowners could only rent to white relatives and keep out people, trying to come back to the city, Black folks, brown folks trying to come back to the city. So this is the way that we work. We try to make these connections in ways that help people understand that Palestine is not thousands of miles away, that it doesn't have impact on what's going on in your daily lives, and that these coalitions of struggle and these common frameworks of analysis make all of us stronger.
And if I may continue on that as well, kind of like as Sandra said, regimes, discriminatory regimes and colonial regimes learn from each other. They learn best tactics, they learn rhetorics, they don't operate in a vacuum. At the same time, resistances, learn from each other as well. So in the same way that what AJP is doing in the United States at the grassroots level and engaging with communities, a lot of these activists also, when they have the privilege to be able to come here to Israel and Palestine, that we're also meeting them on the ground. And you're seeing the tremendous effect of that renewed communication and solidarity movement that has completely shifted U.S. discourse, in the past 10 years, in the past 5 years, in the past few months. You see this in the Black Palestine Solidarity Movement, which made huge leaps in helping people to understand how, if we understand racism, social justice in the United States through this kind of racial lens, this is a lens for us to also understand what's going on in Israel-Palestine, with understanding different dynamics and contexts, but they are somehow they are interconnected. That they do learn from each other, and that there are those tremendous similarities. You see this as well with the American Jewish community, and especially youth activists. And this is a huge testament also to groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, which has really advanced the discourse in absolutely tremendous ways, whereby even liberal American Jews are also coming here, understanding that a lot of Jewish Israelis here don't share the same kind of pro-democracy, pro-equality values in the same way that they do in the United States, and saying, well, if I'm going to be consistent with my values in the U.S., then I should do the same, for Israelis and Palestinians on the ground here. And that is really leaping the conversation forward. And again, just as I was mentioning, in the past few months, there have been major advances in this discourse as well, with our new congresswomen who've been, in the midst of many issues that they're trying to advance, first and foremost for their own constituents, that they've also put Palestine and Israel at the center of their political agendas as well, and that they've gotten massive backlashes, which has come at a huge personal and political cost to them and everyone who works for them, the movements who are trying to support them. But even in that backlash, there's, in the midst of that crisis, you still saw the conversation moving forward. You saw people being polarized in ways that did not happen before. And you have the usual kind of, right-wing, groups and elements trying to push back against it, but then you're seeing this renewed resistance. And the fact that this exists with such prominent, high-profile, rather inspiring congresswomen, that who are not backing down from, from saying that this is what we believe in, we want to show solidarity with everyone, that Palestinian rights is an American issue. And in the same way that you have American right-wingers essentially almost incorporating Israel as if it was their own state, and saying what happens there happens to us, that they're mimicking laws that exist here and applying in the United States, trying to silence Palestine activists through anti-boycott laws at the state level and the congressional level. At the same time that that's happening at the top level, the grassroots is responding to push back against that and to assert human rights into the American political agenda. And it's a very long battle, and we know that neither us nor our audience nor AJP or JVP are naive about the difficulty and upward battle of that. But we are seeing that hope. We are seeing those leaps, and that's absolutely crucial to keep building on as we move forward.
Thank you. Sorry, were you about to add something? No. Okay, it froze for me. Great. So we have about 5 minutes left before we kind of wrap up. But I mean, I think on that note, I'd love to kind of keep it on this note of what we're doing and what we can change and how we're going to move this forward. And so, again, I think I'd like to open up this question to all three of you, really. But if there are things that for this audience of folks who, are already very involved in this movement in very different ways, what are the things that you think we should be like really taking and amplifying moving forward? What are the things that you think activists in the US need to be talking about? Maybe we're already talking about it, but we need to talk about it louder. Maybe you're wondering why it's never discussed at all. What do we need to be amplifying, and kind of how to really make impact here, do you think?
Sandra, you're also welcome to go ahead if you'd like.
I think I mentioned some of them. I mean, I think that this idea that, I think that Adalah's analysis is quite unique in that we are an organization that in some ways has a bird's eye view of how Israel is operating on a legal front. We understand the logic, the structures, how it's being implemented in all places inside historic Palestine. And that I think that people really, could, benefit from describing Israel as the one legal regime that's operating from the river to the sea, and begin to have that analysis about not talking about only annexation and home demolitions in the West Bank, not only talking about the violence against people rising up in Gaza, but really looking at what's happening inside Israel. What's happening against Palestinian citizens of Israel, how land confiscation is happening, how protest is being put down, how intimidation is happening inside. And that really gives people a much better analysis of how to fight this regime. I think the nation state law is an underutilized tool, and it really made things very easy for people to understand. As we know, as Amjad said, it changed nothing and everything at the same time. I think that what it did make very clear is that it put in writing in what Israel stands for. The nation state law is the equivalent of, the US Constitution's "we the people." And it made very clear that we the people is the Jewish people only. And so, if we simply use that to show lawmakers, to show movements that this is their statement, this racist law, no other country in the world defines, its citizenry in this way, or its nationhood in this way, being exclusive to one ethnic group. I think we can really utilize that and make it very clear that this is not Netanyahu. Just like, racism in this country didn't start with Trump. We have to be very clear that it's not about individuals. We have to start talking about root causes and the way that the law works against people who are, oppressed.
I think what could be instrumental to help that argument is to shed light on the quiet Nakba that is ongoing as we speak in the Nakba. There are plans to forcibly displace 125,000 Bedouins from their homes within 5 years, with specific plans that we have been battling. We've been challenging specific plans for 36,000, for 5 specific plans, but they have a master plan for evicting and forcibly transferring a huge amount of still, again, 125,000 people are supposed to leave their homes within 5 years, and they have no specific plans where exactly they should be going. They're going to build camps. We're talking about something that is somehow been shoved to the sidelines of discourse, and this is the forgotten tale of current affairs in Palestine. And I think if activists want to show how this racist regime is working on both sides of the Green Line, this is a great way to look at it. And this is something that can be stopped as well. And there should be international pressure regarding this specific cause as part of the bigger picture, I think.
Yeah. And maybe the one more thing I'll add is, of course, a critical part of our movement is to highlight, what's going wrong. What are the racist practices? What are the racist policies? And this is still a hard battle in the United States to make people be aware of it, to recognize it, etc. And the parallel avenue that we also have to always keep in mind is, of course, the issue of the values. What do we want? What are we striving for? What are we trying to achieve? And, inherently what Palestinians, any Palestinian, whatever side of the Green Line they're on, or whether they're in exile, are fighting for at least 2 principal things, and that's basic freedom and self-determination. And so in whatever form that means, but these are basic human values that they're striving for. And for Palestinian citizens of Israel in particular, there are many different ideologies and opinions and kind of diversities within the community, but there's a core kind of social and political consensus that we all share, which are also based on two pillars. And one is national equality, like full equality, and social justice for all, and an end to the military occupation. These are very basic values, which in any other part of the world would be basic themselves. It's like, well, of course we believe in equality. Of course we believe in everyone's right to not live under military rule. But the fact is that basic consensus is not on par, or is viewed by many Jewish Israelis either as being uncomfortable at best and an existential threat at worst. And that dynamic should be put forward for all allies and solidarity movements across the world, whereby if you believe again in basic equality and freedom, then this is what we're trying to fight for. This is what groups like AJP, JVP, Adalah, and many, many others that the community itself is trying to advance towards. And that's where you find your solidarity. That's who you look to give support, to get information, to understand what is the problem, but also what exactly is our solution. And it's again coming back to that if we remain consistent in what we believe in the United States, we have to remain consistent with applying that same thing in Israel-Palestine as well. That should not get any kind of exception whatsoever.
Thank you all so much. We are out of time, but this has been such a rich conversation. I also just want to say thank you. We had about 65 people on this webinar. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy days. I think it speaks to the fact that we all just want more and more of this brilliant analysis and thought in our lives to kind of guide the work we're doing. I shared in the chat box links to Adalah Justice Project's website, as well as Adalah's website and the Twitter for AJP as well. Please do go now before you forget to join them, follow them, sign up for their lists, and support them because we need to be able to keep supporting this incredible work that's going on. So please do take the time to follow and support AJP and Adalah now. And thank you again so much to our three panelists for this amazing talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Amjad. Bye, everyone.